Well, hey there, Kelly. It's great to see you, and thank you so much today for joining me on the Confident Sober Women podcast. I would love to just turn the mic over to you now and let you share a little bit more about your story, and then we're going to chat.
Sure, I love it. Thank you so much for having me. It's great to meet you. So my name's Kelly Kitley, and I'm a Chicago native. I grew up above my parents' bar, which probably says a lot about my story. In the Lincoln Park area of Chicago, not far from Wrigley Field, and grew up as the oldest of five in a really normalized drinking culture. My paternal grandfather owned the bar, and then my dad bought it from him, and we lived above the bar. And like I said, it was just really culturally acceptable in this piece of, extended family of the locals who came by the bar after work, and some of them were teachers at our school, and it was a really positive experience for me. And, I was very curious about the alcohol culture at a young age as well. I had my first drink, which resulted in a blackout at the age of 12. And then had kind of sworn off drinking for a little while, and then found myself back into, drinking later on in high school, and certainly binge drinking in college. So much so that, I decided to study addiction. I have a lot of family members who are either active addicts or are in long-term recovery. So the good news is I knew where to go once my drinking became problematic, but I really tried to dodge the bullet most of my life in terms of how alcohol impacted me. It destroyed my parents' marriage after 20 years. And I vowed to not follow in those footsteps, but I met my husband at my parents' bar in my early 20s, and we have four teenage children now. And when I got sober 11 and a half years ago, I remember pouring a glass of wine after work and thinking, oh my gosh, I'm following in similar patterns and footsteps as my own parents. So I was very aware of alcohol and the high risk that I was taking in choosing to drink. But I had all these qualifiers. Never drank during the day, never lost my job. Felt like that I could manage it. I was running marathons, all these like very highly productive qualifiers that made me think like I'm doing well. But when I would drink to excess and do things that I regretted, and would swear off drinking the next day for the rest of my life, and find myself grabbing a bottle of wine on my way home from work, to help with the evening transition with small kids at home. And my best friend got sober about 6 weeks before I did, and she drank very similarly to me. And I just saw the transformation really quickly for her. Um, and asked how she did it. And she took me to a women's meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous, and that changed everything for me.
Wow, thank you so much for sharing that. And um, I'm sure there's lots of people out there that can relate to your story. I'm not sure about the living above the bar part, but maybe
Maybe.
there's probably lots of kids that grew up just like that, or in the back of restaurants, or
Mhm,
kind of sweeping the floors up, helping out at the end of the day after these long nights in places where there's tons of drinking.
mhm,
So that lifestyle um becomes your norm. Like you do. You think this is how everybody does it. This is just how what people do for fun and or
mhm,
when they're not well or whatever the reason. And so, yeah, it sounds like you kind of just continue the family tradition. So
mhm.
what I heard you say last was that you got sober in AA and I did as well. And congrats on your 11 years. So
Thank
um, I always love to ask people about that experience, and I don't want to make it a whole big thing about it, but
you.
my experience was I got sober kind of a little bit before you a while ago, and that's all we really had. We just had like
Mhm,
12-step programs in rehab. That was it. And now, we didn't have all the things that we have access to now with Zoom meetings and Quitlet and all the podcasts and modern day recovery stuff. And there's pluses and minuses to that, I guess. For me, it was fine. I didn't know anything else. So that was all I knew. That was what I taught to do. And so that's what I did. I always like to check in with people because one of the things that I've noticed in my own experience, and then certainly in working with hundreds of women over the years who have, gotten and stayed sober, um, is that, that early sobriety time is such a kind of tender time. I always say it's like we have special needs. There's a lot going on. I don't know about you, but I had to really relearn how to, or learn, maybe not even relearn, how to like take care of myself and run my life and the silly things like, brush your teeth twice a day and feed yourself properly and not exercise for 3 hours a day and wash my face, stuff like that, that just I don't know, wasn't really a part of my life regularly,
Mhm.
taking care of myself and just wellness things, and not to mention all the other emotional stuff. So anyway, there's a lot going on during that time. But what I've noticed is that, after about a year or so is when women really tend to kind of come alive.
Mhm.
That way your brain starts to be clear, you're as sober as ever going to be, the fog is lifted, and now you're being exposed to the possibilities of life, right? So these opportunities and possibilities that maybe were just barstool dreams before that we
Mhm.
talked a good talk about are now like, wow, I could actually do that because
Mhm.
you're no longer drinking yourself to death. And
Mhm.
so that I feel like that does happen after that, around that year mark, between 1 and 5 years, it's like a big
Sure.
time for that. But then very often what I see and where I really love to meet people and kind of in my work is, they have these feelings, these desires of their heart are bubbling up, and they've got all these ideas, but they don't really have the roadmap for how to get there. So, like, what do we do? Like, how do we
Mhm.
actually make this from like a dream to reality, right, if you will? And I'm just curious if that is something you could relate to, and then kind of how that worked out for you.
Sure. So, I learned to be more gentle with myself in recovery. I tended to be an overachiever and, juggle a lot of balls in the air and tried rigorously not to drop any of them. And so, I agree. I mean, when I first got sober, I feel like there wasn't a whole lot of resources either as there are now with, sober curiosity. And I did find myself constantly looking for books on spirituality and women who have been down the road of recovery and really glomming on to their story, and if they could do it, how did they do it, and I want to be like that. And so I think that's evolved and changed throughout my sobriety too, as you mentioned. Going from AA for the first few years to then sober retreats and online programs like She Recovers and going to speaking engagements. And it just continues to enhance my recovery. And I think, what I did get really clear about in terms of visions and dreams was my consistency. So I would do these incredible things. For example, I climbed Machu Picchu with my best friend and thought, oh, I can do that, and I'll have this spiritual revelation and all my problems will go away and I'll just stand on that mountain. And I did that and it worked. But then when I would come back from an experience like that, I would be depressed and anxious and overwhelmed and back to the daily rigmarole of life. And so for me, it was really finding a daily practice and a consistency to making sure that I was living my best life as a mom, as a wife, as a professional. I've been a clinical social worker for over 20 years. And, so self care was always something I worked on. I had worked through an eating disorder and some traumas and kept feeling like, okay, I got this, I got this. And it wasn't until my 30s that, I really had to take a hard look at the alcohol.
Mm.
And once I removed that piece of it and started working on some of the therapeutic components in my marriage and trying to break the cycle of what I grew up with, was when I felt like I could show up differently, and have more of those aha moments or spiritual connections, just by waking up 5 minutes early and writing a gratitude list or journaling or lighting a candle. Um, and then being able to ask for help more, was something that I really learned because I
Mhm.
always thought I got to do it on my own. My mom told me she quit drinking by asking God, to help her, and God was her sponsor. And I felt like I did that so many times and it didn't work. It wasn't until I connected with other like-minded women who were at that time also mothers, who were drinking similarly as I was, that I felt like things really started to change for me.
Wow, thanks so much for sharing all of that. I really appreciate that. And I still can relate to it. And I love the example about doing that, the climb. So good for you, by the way. That sounds pretty amazing. I would love to do something. I mean, I've done a lot of really cool things too. Like you mentioned, you were running marathons. I mean, even that kind of thing. It's like, it takes a lot of planning to, and I've done that as well. And you plan them out and you do the work and then you get the thing.
Mhm.
And then
Uh-huh.
there is like a letdown that
Right.
happens. It's kind of like when you got married or if you had another experience, like there's always this like, this big hype and then whew, like, oh my gosh, it's over. And
Yeah.
it does feel a little bit like depression or over, which is weird because like this was a really good thing. I just
Yeah.
climbed this thing or I completed the marathon or I got married, whatever. So it's kind of a weird experience to have this amazing thing that you just went through and then have this weird kind of letdown after effect. But it does make sense because when we're working at such a high level, like a heightened level of expectation and striving, it, when that's over, it's like, oh, well, I'm just left with get the kids up in the morning and then we come home and do the homework and I'm
Mhm.
making dinner and I go to work, and the mundane things of life, which recently, by the way, I have learned. Somebody said to me, um, the peace that we get in life, especially in our older years, is from the boring, mundane things. Like
Yes.
that was recently said to me, and I can't even remember the context, but it was such a light bulb for me. I mean, I'm 49 now, so I get it. Like I'm a little bit older, but like it was such a light bulb thinking back even to my younger years too. Like that is where we get real peace and honestly even freedom.
Yeah.
When we just show up and do the same thing every day. And it sounds so boring and
Mhm.
so not spontaneous, not exciting, but we get that joy and I don't know. Can you relate to this? Is this making sense?
Absolutely. I can relate to it. I'm an adrenaline junkie. So like
Mhm.
I'm always looking for the next hit of dopamine, like the excitement um and I've really had to learn. Like of course I'm human and I still like love amazing experiences. And my takeaway, but I remember, in early sobriety too, it was like, oh, just like sitting on my front porch and drinking coffee and watching my kids play in the front yard, like that brought so much joy. And yeah, I do. There's a saying in AA, chop wood, carry water, like keep doing the same thing. And I know routine is good for us, and I'm a behavioral therapist, so I get that. But sometimes I always try to make it more complicated than it needs to be. And when I simplify things, I'm like, oh, this feels really good.
Yeah, I agree. It does feel really good. And, you know, that routine, you think about our children. I have three young adult children as well. So we're kind of close, I think, in that
Yeah,
stage. When you think about raising kids, like, and the routine that they crave, they need it, right? This
yeah.
is why things like school, work, or whatever, like our bedtime routines, like things that like that make people feel comfortable and
Mhm.
safe. And it reduces overwhelm, it reduces our anxiety because we know what to expect. Every night we do this, every
Yes.
morning we do this. Now, of course, things change, right? There's a snow day or somebody is sick or, we have there's an emergency, some
Mhm,
things, throw the wrench in our plans and our days change all the time, especially when we have kids. But just having those things to count on,
mhm.
like you mentioned, the routines is so critical. And like you probably learned this too when I showed up in AA, I was taught that, you know, I'm not really even sure what my routines were in active addiction. It's been so long. I mean, I probably had some, I guess, but not, I don't really know. I don't think it was very formal. I don't think I appreciated it. I certainly don't know that I look forward to any of it. And so I had to be taught that, like that you just do the same thing every single day
Mhm.
over time. That's what creates the big transformations, right? So I
Mm.
started with just, I get up at about the same time every morning. I have my coffee. I do, I read for a little while. Also, I have prayer time. And then I might just whatever, do whatever for a few minutes. And then I go exercise in some way or move my body.
Mhm.
And that was like developed over time, right? It might just start out with like 5 minutes, for
Yeah.
5 minutes, you do like a little meditation or you read a little positive material, do some affirmations or journaling, and then you carry on. And then you can build on it because
Mhm.
maybe 5 minutes is all you can handle right now. But
Right.
just getting used to doing the same thing every single day like that. And
Mhm.
also, I love like a morning routine is so important because it creates like expectation that like no matter what's going on, and over time your brain like starts to expect this and learn like this is what I do every day. So you can have the worst day ever or be going through something horrible, but like your brain knows, well, tomorrow morning I'm going to sit in that chair, I'm going to have my coffee, it's going to be quiet and very nice, and it's like something for you to look forward to.
Oh, absolutely. That morning routine and that just feeling that helps me to feel grounded, and I think too, as we talk about parenting, that can be really good modeling behavior too. And when I was drinking, I was so unpredictable. And so like I would set good intentions. I'm only going to drink 2 drinks tonight. And then I'd have 12, or I'm not going to be hungover in the morning, or maybe I will, or maybe I'll black out, or maybe I won't. Like there was so much Russian roulette with that I love being able to today say I'm gonna do something and have follow through. Or no, if I do this, X is usually the outcome.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think that's so powerful and important, and we really do minimize it. We minimize it, and that's why it's important early on to be taught those kind of things, I think, in early sobriety, because again, when you're and then it just gets better and better over time, so that when we do have this stuff of life that's coming up, raising kids or work or whatever, it creates a lot of anxiety and overwhelm for any of us really, right? But
Mhm, mhm,
if you can generate the peace and serenity inside of yourself, and that
mhm.
that climb to the mountain for that spirituality um isn't really going to do that for you. Like you can do it, it's still going to be fun, you're still going to have pretty spiritual experience, it's going to be
Yeah.
a spiritual
Mhm,
experience,
mhm.
but it doesn't um really feel like that hole in your soul completely. Like it's a cool thing, but then you have to be able to we have to be able to do that for ourselves
Mhm.
in order for it to be a lasting thing.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And, I think that something that I needed to practice was I was such a runner. So anytime anything got bad, I would be like, "Oh, I gotta get out of here. I gotta move. I've got to change jobs," whatever it might be, and thinking that my situation would get better. And it would temporarily. And then I would come back to whatever it was I left. And all these tools that I had gained, whether it was a spiritual experience or a physical experience or whatever it might be, it was only a matter of time that I was like back in the trenches of feeling like shit. So I like this way better. And certainly, even I am not as active in AA anymore, but even when I say to my family, I'm gonna go to a meeting, they're like, "Oh, are you okay? Do you feel like you're gonna drink?" Like,
Right.
no, I just need to pause and collect myself and connect with other sober people, because we get out of routine, right? Like life happens, and sometimes it's not as much of a priority, because something else takes precedence to it. But it's something that it's a daily practice, right? Like we don't just get sober and by stopping drinking. It's like we need to do the work day in and day out.
I always say sobriety is only the beginning.
Mhm.
The work is really comes so much after that with the emotional sobriety work, which is what we're really talking about. And then that's an evolution of in and of itself, right? So as we, continue down the path and we're starting to learn more about our own ourselves, and truly what we're talking about too is, emotional regulation. And
Mhm.
I'm not as active in AA anymore either. I love the program. I still recommend it, especially in the beginning. I think it's really, really important. Not
Mhm.
against it. I would go if I need, but I also do recovery work every day,
Yeah.
all the time. And so I think that's really, really important for us to start to layer on other things, So we
Correct.
need good therapy, for example. Like I did really great therapy, EMDR work in my beginnings, so I could clear out a lot of that past trauma and heal my brain. We need, I used a lot of complementary medicine like Reiki and acupuncture and just like other wellness strategies, learning about nutrition and supplementation. We get to layer on all these other tools,
Oh, yeah.
and they become kind of the fabric of our being and of our recovery being to help us thrive in long-term recovery, right? So that's what it takes. Like, and even people who go to AA, I mean, whatever, like AA might be the best thing in the world for you, and that's totally cool.
Mhm.
Like I said, I still love it. And even if you just do that every single day, that might be all you need. But I find that most people I know, even if they're still doing that, at get to some point in that 5 year range, I think, or sometimes
Mhm.
longer. For me, it was
Mhm.
longer because I needed a lot of, I was sometimes swiftly, sometimes slowly, right?
Yeah.
Um, like they realized they needed more than that. They needed more than 12 step, right? They need more, they need the things we're talking about.
Right, right. Well, and that I needed to learn that too because I felt like if I was going to 3 meetings a week and talking to my sponsor and working the steps and like I would this went back to my perfectionism, right? Like then I'm a good AAer. And then life got busy and the kids were getting busier and I wasn't able to go to as many meetings and then I felt like, "Oh gosh, I'm so bad at AA." And it was like, "But wait a second. There are all these other things that are complementary and going to meetings is another sense of support as well as, oh, these 10 other things that you're doing."
Yeah, exactly. And I just think everybody's so different. And also our ages and stages are different, right? So,
Absolutely.
I mean,
Mhm,
depending on what's going on with you, like when my kids were little, I had 3 kids in 4 years. So it was, very busy. My husband worked a huge job. So I was the primary caregiver and I was working for a little bit in the beginning and then I stopped because I was home because I had too many kids and we couldn't afford the daycare.
mhm,
And that was like a very busy time. It's so taxing. It's so you're just physically so tired, I feel like.
mhm,
And I just didn't have a lot of the resources as far as energy was concerned, to do much more than just serve my family, right? Make the dinner, provide for
mhm,
the kids, do the
mhm.
thing, which was wonderful. I mean, I love every single minute of it, but most of it, really grateful I had that time. And, and so there wasn't a lot of room for pursuit of like professional things for me, or it was a lot more of like I'm supporting, my husband's pursuit of his professional things, or I'm supporting my kids in their school and their sports and all that.
Mhm,
And I slowly, with time, I was able to do that. So the emotional tax of having little kids wasn't really too bad. I mean, there was some stuff that went on. I felt it was a little bit more of like just a physical nature of just the running around, the dealing with their emotions. Um,
mhm,
and then for me anyway, as they got older, that in their teen years, which was very very challenging for us. We just had like a lot of different things go on. Then we had COVID on top of it when they were still in high school, and it was just a lot. And that to me was even though I'd been sober for like kind of a super long time by then, like I was so challenged in my emotional sobriety then,
mhm.
um, to do more and need more work on myself, kind of hit me like a brick, right? So
Right.
age and stage, I think, is a big part
Yeah.
of this. What we need
Mhm,
at one point, what we need at another are different.
mhm,
So, like in
mhm,
marriage too, if you are married or if you're with a partner, that ages and stages too. And if they're going through a tough time and you're kind of like, come on, let's go. Like you're trying to pull them along, like you're, pretty well, but they're not, and you're waiting so,
mhm,
or like something goes on and there's like a conflict, and you know, that can create a lot of feelings,
mhm,
you know,
mhm.
and like And so then we're just kind of left with like, what do we do with it? And what do we do with it as sober people? Even if like I said, even if you've been sober a long time, we can make ourselves not well
Yeah.
or actively in quote unquote addiction with other things. For me, it was food, right? So I
Mhm.
started using food as a really inappropriate resource for coping. They created a lot of other problems. It was
Uh-huh.
never my thing before, but it became my thing because it's like socially acceptable, it's easily readily available, and it feels good for a hot second.
Mhm. Well, addiction is addiction is addiction, right?
Yeah,
Like, I
right.
mean, the connection between, for me, it was the eating disorder was my first addiction, in my teen years. And, it's like I have a hyper tendency to, when something feels good, I want a lot of it. So whether it's good for you or bad for you, I want it.
Right.
So it does. I mean, and then we talk about cross addiction, right? And so we have to keep our brains in check because it is a
Hmm.
brain disease.
Yeah, we really do. And cross addiction is such an interesting phrase. It's not one that I actually keep top of mind, but it's what it is. It's true. We do need to be aware because, like you said, like I mean, my natural way, and I'm very aware of this, and I feel like I try to teach other people about this, like both in therapy and in my coaching work or here, whatever I'm doing, is to kind of figure that out for yourself, like whether I'm working with another person in recovery or not, like whatever, because we all have stuff.
All
So
right.
you got to figure out what your kind of natural way is, and
Mhm.
for me, and I think as humans, as human beings, our natural way is very self-centered. Just that's just the way God made us. I think, we're just naturally self-centered human beings who want what we want. And we want to feel better. We want to um, get what we want, right? And
Mhm.
so a lot of times we will do whatever it takes to do that. And so when you are in an active recovery, you will look for the same thing because my natural way is to get out, get away, get rid of those feelings, escape it,
Mhm.
right? And
Mhm.
so I'm going to look for the next best thing that's going to help me do that because I'm not going to pick up a drink or a drug. That's just not going to happen for me.
Yeah.
And so I will look for the next thing, and
Mhm.
that's going to give me the dopamine hit that's necessary for me to get out of that thing, right?
Yeah, and it makes you feel this similar feelings after the binge is over or after, if somebody restricts, it's that shame and guilt. And I mean, it's so similar to alcohol or drug addiction.
Yeah.
It's the feelings associated with it before for the chase and the after effects.
Yeah, I mean, and it could be shopping or sex or whatever the
Yes.
thing is,
Yeah.
gambling. Yeah, it's definitely the chase. It was interesting that you mentioned that. I was working with a young client who I loved and adored, who was a heroin addict, like pretty young, I mean, in her 20s, but she was a chronic relapser. I mean, just couldn't get
Mhm.
it. Like lots of
Mhm.
rehabs, chronic relapser, um, and super smart. Um, Went to college, but like just that didn't last because of her addiction. Anyway, I remember her telling me like we were doing EMDR, really working, and I'm like, okay, I really like I was super invested and like ready to, and I believe she was too, but she would say things like, I just know like I'm gonna do it again. Like when I do this again, where am I gonna be in life so that I don't have to like end up in rehab or end up in a halfway. Like so, she would say things like, "I just want to get this degree so I can get a job and have my own apartment or house or whatever, so I don't have to like go back to my parents."
Uh-huh. Mm.
And I'm like, that's not actually how that works. But the very logical way of being able to logically work through that just was like astounding to I was like
Yeah.
and I kept thinking
It's
like, wait,
insane. I
like
mean, if when
she
it's not in our own head, we
like
can see
she
that.
believed that.
Yeah.
And I would be like, girl, like your track record already shows you like that is not how that's gonna go.
Yeah. Right.
But my other point was like, she would I would so we were using EMDR one time, and I kind of we were stuck a little, so I kind of reversed it with like Popkey talks about this like reverse way of using it, like what's good about getting high, or what's good
Mhm.
about using drug, like being an
Mhm.
addict. And so she talked about that, like she described that whole thing. She is like,
Mhm.
it's the finding it,
Uh-huh.
she's like, it's not even really the using anymore. She had so much experience, it was the calling the drug dealer, like
Yeah.
finding who I could get it from, driving there,
Mhm.
seeking. I'm like, oh my gosh, like, and I've been out of the world for a while, I guess. So
Yeah.
it's just
Yeah.
like, but like, wow, like her painting the picture even for me made me
Mhm.
be able to insert that into other things. Like for me, it's like, ooh, like I can be so regimented about my food like you. I mean, I struggle with food. That was a big part of my story. When I was
Mhm.
younger, I was so regimented. And then I've had different times in my recovery, like where I'm like weighing and measuring and planning and making counting macros and doing all the things for fitness reasons.
Sure.
Um, but like I started was so regimented at home that like when I would leave my home became like this thrill. I
Uh,
actually worked on this. I went back to therapy at one point to work on this in EMDR because I was like, when I get in my car,
yeah.
it was like I was like, where, what can I get?
Mhm.
Like, where can I go?
Right, right.
I'm like, oh, I can get a Chick-fil-A milkshake.
Uh-huh.
I could go to Panera Bread and get that cookie. And I'm like, oh
Uh-huh.
my God,
Yeah.
this is like that is sick.
Mhm. You don't other people don't think like that?
I
I
don't
relate.
I don't really know. I mean, thank you. I don't really know that maybe,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
that's what happens for me.
Totally.
And it actually still can very
Mm.
easily when
Oh, yeah.
I'm not in a great space, when I haven't taken care of those other things.
Well, and we eliminate drugs and alcohol in sobriety and recovery. We don't eliminate food. We have to learn how to have a relationship with food and exercise.
Exactly.
I think that's a little harder.
Yeah, it's so true because we all have to eat. We have to eat to live. And, problems with food is hard. It's just part of it. And, there's definitely ways to work on that and become more, and I've seen the progress in my own life too. With, you know, over time and continued work, I don't automatically go into like those old patterns. Like at the first sign of like an issue with
Uh-huh.
my husband or something, I'm not
Uh-huh.
gonna automatically be like, oh my God, I have to start doing this behavior.
Yeah.
That's not really my first way anymore. It's more subtle.
Mhm.
Sometimes it creeps in, but there's a lot more grace for myself, and I've seen that happen a lot for myself. And I don't know if
Mm,
you can relate to that, but
yeah.
I share sometimes too, like, I don't know if you know Rachel Hall.
Mhm.
She's pretty famous. She talks about, I don't know if it's in one of her books or where I heard it, but when she was like going through her divorce and it was just a really tough time. She was in a horrible time, but
Mhm.
she had these very specific routines in her life similar to what we're talking about. A lot of it evolved around nutrition, some of it around like movement, and she had commitments to herself. And she talked about how I don't ever break my commitments. And that's what we're talking about here, right? And
Yeah.
this is how we retrain our brain, right? We
Mhm.
retrain the neural pathways in our brain. This is not me saying this is science. With neuroscience tells us we can retrain the neural pathways in our brain by consistently doing the same thing over and over and over again. And then that teaches our brains to know it can trust us. So
Mm.
like Kelley consistently does what she says she's going to do every time so that when she goes to make a change in a routine, like, oh, well, now I decided I want to wake up a half an hour earlier because I want to add this to my routine. Your brain's kind of like, yeah, that's cool. Like she's going to do that. Um, she talked about that, and her commitment was like that she would move her body 30 minutes a day. Like that's just she just didn't break
Uh-huh.
it. And
Uh-huh.
she was in times where she would get home late from after times with her friends or whatever and like get on the treadmill and like she still had to do it. And
Mhm.
so because of that, she had that in her mind, but like she was in this phase of life, and maybe you've had a time like this, maybe you can share about it. I know I have during that time I just talked about with my kids where she was soul tired. She used that word. She was just like
Uh-huh.
soul
Uh-huh.
tired to her bone. Not exhausted, the kind that we're just like, oh my God, I'm so tired. It was like everything was just depleted. And
Mhm.
she just didn't have anything. But she would go to the gym anyway. And she would
Mhm.
show up there and just like lay on the mat and stretch.
Mm.
Or like that's what I did. Or like
Yeah.
I'd get on the
Yeah.
treadmill and like walk at 3.0,
Mhm.
because I didn't want to break those commitments to myself, but I had to
Mhm.
give myself a lot of grace to say, like, this is all I have. So I'm going to still do a thing. It's just not going to look like what it, like, quote unquote, normally would look like.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
and that's okay.
Yeah. And I think that that's good grace to have
Yeah.
because I think not I think, I know from other people who are not in recovery that that can seem very rigid, and sometimes I have been very rigid in my routines too, and not knowing when to give myself a break, so I think making the commitment to self, but then also making accommodations based on where you are is so important. And to say, like, it's okay if I don't do this today. The world is not going to end. Maybe I need to crawl in bed instead.
Right. I mean, I do think it's a fine line,
It
right?
is a fine line.
It's a fine
Yes.
line because I come from probably similar to you, just like a long-standing people and belief system around, we work hard and that's important and that's a value of ours. We're not, you
Mm,
know, lazy. And so I had to learn that rest is productive. So that's another thing, right? Like
Yep.
rest is actually
Yep.
productive. But that like there's a way to do what I just said. Like you can still honor and respect yourself by saying, I do these things,
Hmm.
every day. But in certain periods, they just might look a little different. Like I go slower or
Yep.
I do it for less time or
Yes.
whatever it is.
Yes.
And because we don't want to get into another point where we're like, because this is, I think, what the world tells us right now. The world says a lot like, oh, you don't have to do that. You don't have to do that. It's fine. Like you should give yourself grace, forgive yourself. You don't have, it's whatever. And like that can be a slippery slope too, right? Because then you
Sure.
can slip into like, now we just don't honor our values at all, you
Yeah.
know?
I can have that extra large milkshake because I deserve it. Because it's gonna
Right. I mean, we gotta check ourselves, right? Like, I feel like
exactly.
as sober people, I'm like, I don't drink, I don't smoke, I don't use drugs. Like, I don't like there are, so for me, sometimes I'm like, yeah, I am gonna like eat the ice cream because I just like really, I need like a thing. Um,
You need some vice. I know.
but
The
it's like when
coffee,
the thing
my
becomes
last vice.
like your coping mechanism, we have to check in with that. Like,
Yeah.
is this really a healthy coping mechanism for, so you get to, I think when we're asking ourselves those good questions, like, today is this okay, yes, but is this, now it's 3 weeks later and we're still doing this every day, is this really helping me, or we
Right.
reversed into like hurting? And so
Yes.
being able to check in
Hmm.
with us is really important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. A lot of checking in.
Right.
Pulse check.
Self-awareness,
Yeah.
self-awareness.
Mm-hmm.
um I was just talking about that with a client before earlier this morning about self-awareness and like how that's such a, it's a lengthy process. It takes a long time to learn and practice some of these skills to help us become more self-aware.
Yeah, yeah, and some of my clients too will say like, "This is so hard. Was I better off not knowing?" I'm like, "Well, avoidance and denial, yeah, those are it's sometimes coping mechanisms, but usually not don't last very can't last very long."
Yeah, I mean, and we all have people in our life, like either family or like friends or even coworkers or whatever, where they're like safe enough that we can practice some of these things. Like, we
Mhm,
can practice kind of asking for what we need, or when we are discerning something in our environment, like that, like someone's expressing something, or we are getting activated by someone else's, feelings or things, and we can check in, we can say like, hey, I noticed that you're not really like your best self today, or you seem like you're a little, angry or something. Did I do something to create that?
mhm,
It's a
mhm,
great opportunity for us to um, check in with
yeah,
ourselves by using other people to like help validate our experience. Now, and sometimes it might be like they might be like, well, yeah,
yeah,
you earlier you said blah blah blah, and that really hurt my feelings.
uh-huh,
Or and so then now you've created an opportunity though to follow up with that and be like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry, I didn't realize that, and now you can talk about it, right? So
yeah,
either
yeah,
way, either you get the, no, it's not about you at all.
mhm,
I'm frustrated with work, or we just got this bill for this thing and I don't have the money to pay, or you get, yeah, you did.
mhm,
Here's what it is. And now we can talk about it.
yeah, well, those are healthy that's healthy communication in relationships, which,
Yeah.
not everybody has those,
No,
and they're trying to practice it.
we're trying to practice it. And it
Yeah.
does take time,
Mhm,
and I do think when you're earlier on in your journey in recovery, like you're so used to functioning at a level that's very self-centered,
mhm,
that's not focused on emotional regulation, that you have a lot, we have a lot to learn
Yeah.
and grow, and then also when you're in relation with other people, like, I don't know about you, but like when my kids, like, I still feel like, yes, these are my children. I, raise them, but they don't belong to me. They're their own people. And so, and each of them is their own. So I have to learn them,
Mm.
to learn who they are, like learn how they like to be loved, learn how they're going to respond best. And so that is like also a really good classroom for learning about yourself so that
Mhm.
you can kind of realize like, oh wow, like my way of doing things isn't going to be effective in this situation. What would be better?
Mhm. Look at all
So
these opportunities we have to practice.
so many. So we should all be much more elevated than we are, right? Or actualized. um
Mm.
All right. Well, tell us a little bit about your practice because I love it. I love the name of your practice. You can share
Thank
that
you. Thank
and
you.
kind of like what you're up to and all
Sure.
the fun things you're doing in your business.
Yeah, so I own Serendipitous Psychotherapy.
Love that.
And after COVID, I moved from downtown Chicago to my home office on virtual Zoom, which has been great because there are a lot more people throughout the Chicagoland area that I can see, and even in different parts of Illinois. And I wrote an autobiography of survival called Myself, and I published that in 2017. My husband is an actor, so we produced a short film called Gray Area that people can see for free on YouTube.
Wow.
That is an adaptation of a piece of the book, and I use that film to travel around the country and educate communities about women's mental health and alcohol abuse, and just do a lot of TV and media appearances to educate the general public. I call it my public service, about mental health and wellness. And that's certainly a labor of love to break stigmas and increase education around, taboo topics, and helping people to live their best life.
I love that. And I'm so thankful for you and your husband, obviously, for creating these opportunities to spread the message of hope. That is what we do when we recover out loud. Not everybody's doing that and wants to do that, and it's fair. It's totally fine. But
Mhm.
when we do, we bring hope to other people who really need it, whether you're already in recovery and you're struggling and you just kind of need help finding your way, or
Mhm.
you're still trying to figure it out, like, how do I get sober? Do I want to be sober? Wherever you are in your journey with that, we all need hope to grasp onto. We need
Right.
something to cling to. And yeah, whenever we're doing work in the community to talk about mental health, to bring light to it, to just normalize it. I always say, I'm in the business of like normalizing not drinking, that it's not actually a prerequisite for college. It's
Yeah.
not a prerequisite for life. Not everybody drinks. I didn't know that when I was out there.
Right.
I just thought everybody was kind of, I thought that was weird. I'm like, what do you mean that there's actually people that like just don't drink? They don't
Yeah.
like it. They're not into it,
Mhm.
like that's a real thing. And
Mhm.
that can be fine and fun too. So, the more the messaging gets out, the more
Yeah.
people continuously see it because we
Mhm.
all have this in our lives. We all have it,
Right.
whether it looks like the mental health side, whether it's more of a substance use side. We all have it around us, and we're going
Mhm.
to encounter it in some form, often multiple forms. So the more, kind of armor we have, the more tools that we have, the more empathy and compassion we have for people's struggles, the better off other people are, and the better off the world will be because they'll know, like, everyone gets depressed sometimes. We all get overwhelmed at times. Sometimes it becomes like a clinical issue. Like, what do we do? You
Mhm.
know,
Mhm.
it's
Well,
just got
and I think also, in alignment to hope, it's so that I don't feel so alone,
yeah.
right? Like, and not me, I mean anybody, right? Like, we think that we're unique in our experiences or our feelings or our thoughts. And
Mm,
just as I hope people heard today, like, there were a lot of things that you and I related to with one another that people don't normally talk like that, right? Like, talking about
right,
the obsession of food, or, whatever it might be. So to say, oh my gosh, me too, tell
right,
me about that. It
right.
makes me feel less alone. And I want to know how you are able to work through that so that maybe I can learn how to work through that. That's what was helpful for
Absolutely.
me. Yeah.
And as you do too, I'm sure we need to encourage everybody to make sure you're doing that and you're sharing your story and what's, safe spaces for you. Not everybody deserves to hear our whole story, all of the parts of it. We can't share that with all people or everywhere because we don't know that they're going to protect that. Not everybody deserves that. But we can, I think everybody can receive, and most anybody can share in kind of in general ways about some of these concepts. Like I remember a time when I felt really overwhelmed, or when I felt like I was being controlled by food. We don't even have to get into, the nitty-gritties of our
Right.
stories, to make it very relatable and palatable to the general public. And I think when we do that, you're right. Most people, light bulbs are going off and they're like, huh, maybe that's the first time they've ever heard anybody ever share that. Maybe they've lived in a community or in a space or even a church environment or a school where you just really didn't get below the surface
Mm-hmm.
ever. Like
Hmm.
people didn't really share about the real stuff of life. That's really happening.
Yeah.
And so the more we do that, I just think the better it is for people to see, like, yeah,
Hmm.
look at that woman. Like she's the mom of these 4 kids. She's out here killing it at the PTA meetings, and she's working and she's traveling and she's got her craft together. She must be making millions of dollars. Like she's totally like she's perfect, you
Hmm.
know, until they hear you say, like, wow, no, I struggled with this. And then
Yeah. Yeah.
they're like,
Mhm.
oh,
Right.
okay. So
Right.
both things can be true at the same time.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Amen.
So
Hmm.
Kelly, thanks so much for your time. Really appreciate you. Where do you like people to reach out to you if they want to get a hold of you?
Sure. So they can go directly to my website. It's Kelley, Kelley, Kitley, Kitley.com.
Perfect. I'll link to that below in the show notes. And I look forward to continuing to follow your journey. And I hope our paths cross again sometime soon.